the year. Yes, it's exciting. Are you ready? Are you excited? What do we need, people? Drum roll, please. It's Flamingo Friday. Yes, we finally made it. The first one of the year. You only get a few more left. Huh? We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
I already got $9. I already got $2. I know, dude.
Cool. So we did get through all this?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So let's very quickly go through them. Just a few elements. We already had your notes, but I just want to make sure I have you know that. Remember, the 13th Amendment was done right before the war ended. Who watched Lincoln for extra credit? A couple people did. Yeah, that's basically the story of this. And in slavery, except for punishment for crime. Gee, I wonder if that's going to become an issue down the road. Under presidential reconstruction, they all had to ratify the 13th. But it says nothing about, oh, almost forgot. So even though people tie it to the 13th Amendment, it's more related to the Emancipation Proclamation. But on June 19th, 1865, the United States Navy formally came in and took Galveston, Texas. There have been a couple efforts during the war to take Galveston and that failed. So the Confederate Army, there was a small Confederate force who had not yet surrendered. There's still going to be a battle in Texas about 2 weeks after this, or about a week after this. But anyways, it would be on this day that literally, you can imagine what happened. Many of the planters, fearful of being arrested for treason, which would never happen, but they took off. And you have enslaved people would literally met the U.S. Army at the docks when they're getting off the U.S. Navy ships. And they had heard a rumor, and they thought it was a myth of the Emancipation Proclamation. They heard about it. And then, of course, we kind of tie that into the 13th Amendment that had just passed Congress. They heard about it. They said, yeah, it's true. You're liberated and you're free. And that is going to be remembered in Texas and soon spread to areas where there's going to be a large population of people who were descendant of slaves. And it became known as Juneteenth for June 19th. And to be honest with you, most people did not know much about it. I didn't know about it until the early 1980s. And I remember when people would talk about this in the 2000s, most adults I knew, I know I live in Montana, but most adults I knew did not know. And I imagine I know for a fact that was the way it was all over. But 3 years ago, that became a national holiday. And that is a holiday now. And it's a holiday to remember emancipation in the end of slavery. And I think it's a pretty appropriate date. What date do you choose? You do use it the date of the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. Well, that was January 1st, 1863. It doesn't really work. There's already a holiday there. And the ratification of the 13th Amendment, that's more complex. Good day. So that's why Juneteenth, June 19th, is a national holiday today. Yes, it was opposed by a lot of people, but eventually the majority of Congress voted for it. All Democrats, and it turned out about half Republicans voted for it. So it did pass, and that is the law. And since Biden was president, he did so. All right, but it never said anything about citizenship. I know we read about this, but this is the important thing. It never said they were citizens. And that, of course, is going to be in the air until we get to the 14th Amendment. So let's get to one thing. What was that body that was created to provide a little bit of food, etc.? Yeah, so the Freedmen's Bureau. And Southern Democrats immediately opposed this. Immediately. It was always very small. Their budget was tiny. I mean, heck, they dramatically cut back military spending, and it was still about 1/100% of that. But that's pretty traditional in the United States. The United States spends very little on social programs. Very little. As relationship to other things of its discretionary budget. The United States has big insurance programs called Social Security and Medicare. They spend a lot on that. And basically what the whole thing was discredited. And soon in pro-democratic newspapers, you'll get cartoons like this. So this is what I wanted to show you. And this really pushed this idea that this was money going to now former slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau. Agency to keep the Negro in idleness at the expense of the white man. So look at the horrible racial caricature of a freedman. That horrible expression. You'll see the same thing when they use it in the justify taking American Indian land and then colonization of like the Philippines. Lazy because of the Freedmen's Bureau and white men work. Same deal. The popular idea of the Freedmen's Bureau: plenty to eat, nothing to do. So freedmen now lazy, sitting around doing nothing, while those behind work and are very disgruntled. And of course, it's blacks would be not working, whites working, and this idea of lazy folks. And that goes back to that positive good theory. Remember that. Slavery is helping the enslaved. If not, they wouldn't know how to work. They would just be lazy because they have no real knowledge of how to work and how to care for themselves. So imply that their inferior don't know what to do. And this would be used for, well, till today. It's still, this trope is used. And that's the carpetbaggers. The carpetbaggers, many of them were from the Freedmen's Bureau. They went down to help start these public schools that were created at first with the Freedmen's Bureau, and then they became dubbed as carpetbaggers. And the idea of the carpetbaggers were a bunch of people from the North take advantage of the poor South. This was from a textbook from the 1970s. And it said carpetbaggers, it's biblically plain, use Southern defeat for personal gains. That's a little cartoon there. And here it is, a Northerner, a carpetbag with money, stealing from the poor South. That's not at all what it was for the most part. Oh, there are people who came in to take advantage of the bad economy to buy land for cheap. That did happen. But the majority were actually with the Freedmen's Bureau. Carpetbag, literally, take a piece of carpet, cheap furniture, or I'm sorry, cheap luggage. Sew the ends, put a latch on it, suitcase, carpetbag. That's all it was. 2 bowls of carpet sold. And so you see carpetbaggers used to this day as somebody from out of state who comes in to take advantage of the state. Montana now has a lot of very wealthy out-of-staters who kind of run the state, and so that has been used to attack that. Fair or unfair? That's what. If you ever hear that term, that's what. So presidential Reconstruction, just to review. Remember, that's the first plan. That was Lincoln's 10% plan, wartime measure. Johnson took it, which was clearly not going to be Lincoln's plan, but claiming I'm doing what Abraham Lincoln wanted. Here's a pro-Johnson cartoon. Have you ever seen that game where they take it was an old magic trick, 2 loops, and they kind of look like almost like keychain things where they can kind of put them together. It's a magician trick. Here he is, north and south, and it's applying to bring them together easily, gradually, by not being too harsh. Of course, what is that going to lead to? What were the name of the governments that were created in the South of former Confederates? You remember that term? Oh, almost forgot. 1868, general amnesty would be given to all former Confederates. And this is actually kind of an interesting thing. So, you have this ideology in the South that led to this horrific civil war that nearly 1 million people died. You have this idea there. And Reconstruction issue, you have to bring back these parts of the United States and therefore get rid of that ideology that led to civil war. That never happened. The people who believe that got amnesty. So, for example, after World War II, when the Soviet Union, France, Britain, and the United States, Soviet Union did the bulk of the fighting, defeated Nazi Germany. They did denazification. And they banned the party, banned the symbols of it, and would not allow any new government to even have, well, technically, any resemblance to the old National Socialist Party. They banned it. The United States, no, didn't happen. Gee, I wonder if that'll be a problem down the road. I should add, in Germany, the Nazis are coming back in the neo-Nazi party, and it's becoming quite prominent. What's the name of the party?
AfD.
Yeah. Which means?
Alternative for Deutschland, like alternative for Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. And the richest man in the world is a big supporter of them. Who's the richest man in the world? Yeah, he's a big supporter of the neo-Nazi party in Germany. I've actually seen the second time I was in Berlin, they they accosted us. Me, my wife, and her sister, your mom, were walking through Berlin, and they tried to get us to join and gave us a bunch of pamphlets. They didn't mind me, but they really were interested in my wife and sister. So moving on. The district governments. Huh? Why don't you know? I think you were like 2 or 3. You're a smart guy. Yeah, I know. It was not that big of a deal. I just remember they gave us pamphlets, and I threw it away. You were like, ah. I'm going to be honest. I'm biased against Nazis. But I know it's kind of weird now. I'll almost have to announce that because it's becoming so popular now. But I kind of wish I would have kept it. I wish I would have kept it, but I was so mad I threw it away. Moving on. Those are the black codes. Remember those. I'm just kind of reviewing a few things. Remember the black codes. Republicans would not see them. They went nuts, and that led to congressional reconstruction. By the way, you'll notice a lot of pictures like this. And this is a common theme through today. And it's implying that here we have a freedman, pretty horrible caricature, but a freedman trying to vote. That's voting. Those are the ballot boxes. And not being allowed. And they try to show them as poor Southern whites. So it's just a bunch of poor Southern whites who don't know any better. Let's be very clear. The people behind them were the remnants of the planter class. The wealthy are the ones pulling the strings. It's not the poor. They're just being divided. And this goes all the way back to Bacon's Rebellion. Remember that. So, Congressional Reconstruction. That is the Reconstruction Act. It's called the Military Reconstruction Act, so you should know this. And they had to ratify the 13th, 14th, and later the 15th Amendments. This is Reconstruction. This is the one to try to guarantee rights, to enroll voters. And, oh, I love this picture. I love this one. Here it's trying to show the edifice of state. And each of these, they're like columns holding up the United States. Those are the states. And this is pro-Reconstruction, so they're bringing back the Confederate States. So you see the United States right here? These are the founding fathers for the beginning of the country. All behind, they're in the heavens now, watching the country come back. So like glorifying that the nation is back with the Reconstruction. And do you see it? Why, this makes me laugh so hard. Look at the faces up there. It's hard to see, but can you see them? No. Yes, it's Calhoun with the neck hair. I know, I'll bring out the slam. There's Clay, Lincoln, Washington. That just makes me laugh so hard. So,
Just say.
to the southern view, invasion. This was an invasion. So the same professor that told me, I think I've told you about this, that slavery really wasn't that bad, my freshman year at Rocky Mountain College, slavery wasn't that bad, not a big deal, also told us that Reconstruction was an invasion of the South. Oh yeah, he had an accent. God, I hated that guy. Not just because of that, even though that was horrible. He was just, he was a treat. But, never forget this. These are the military districts. So the Army came in, and they occupied them. So they allowed for governments to come in when they ratified the amendments, like 1870. But for example, the military did not leave until 1873. The last 3 states would be Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. So once they established the governments. And at first, a lot of Southern whites, now they're all kind of Democrats, they refused to participate. And they did everything they can to destabilize the governments. But eventually they're going to finally go, okay, we're not going to go back. So let's take over. They would begin to participate. And that's where you start seeing the big shift. So a few more things. Here is a guy riding an elk through the streets of Missoula. And I know this has no application at all, but I found this picture and I didn't want to be alone in seeing it. So now we have all seen it together. An elk being ridden in Missoula. Did you know you could ride elk? That's how I got to school when I was a kid. And just remember the 14th Amendment came about, the most important amendment. The Bill of Rights now applies. born in the United States, you're a citizen, enshrined the federal debt, the most important part of the Constitution, but who is not necessarily included in the 14th Amendment? Yeah, just a small portion of the population is not guaranteed equal rights. Once again, that still boggles my mind. That and most people don't know it. They might intuitively know it, especially 53% of the population might know that the rights are kind of unequal, but didn't know that's still enshrined in the Constitution. So, 15th Amendment, we know about the right to vote, but I wanted to show you that's the actual text. You don't have to don't write this down, but just, you see how it doesn't say the right to vote? It just says it can't be taken away. I know that's kind of weaselly. You have to be kind of a weasel to interpret you're not the right of the citizens to vote, saying it's not the right to vote. But there's going to be weasels who will do this. There's going to be weasels who will say this is 1868 glorifying the right to vote. So we will come back to the 15th. And once again, women are not included. And since it says citizens and women are not citizens, that's why the 14th Amendment does not guarantee equal rights for all people, because for all citizens, or for all people in the United States, because citizens are men. Women are second-class citizens. All right, a few more things. Impeachment of Johnson didn't happen because he refused to support the Military Reconstruction Act, and they actually were so furious at Johnson that they impeached him before they even had any reason to impeach him. They didn't have any, even though it's not a criminal case, impeachment is political, they still have to have indictments to say that he is convicted of crime. They impeached him before they had, and they finally came back, we impeach you, and they wrote the 14 indictments. Any one of these 14, if he's convicted in the Senate, he's removed from office. Any one of these 14. There was a Tenure of Office Act. There was a bunch of them, but the biggie clearly violate the Constitution. This is exactly why people like Madison and George Mason wanted this in the Constitution. They assumed impeachment would happen a lot. That there would be presidents who might abuse their power to either get reelected or to get rich. Or they would just not follow the Constitution and not carry out the laws. As it turned out, this showed why it didn't work. It showed why it didn't work. There would be a trial in the Senate. They need 2/3 of the vote in the Senate. And for a couple, the closest they got was 35 to 19 for conviction. But it's not 2/3. They were 1 vote short. 1 vote short. Almost every Republican voted to convict, but a few didn't. For various reasons. The election's coming up or whatever. Every Democrat voted to acquit. And it shows the problem. So the next impeachment would happen when Bill Clinton was impeached. And you could argue whatever about the merits, but every Democrat voted to acquit. The first impeachment of Trump, every Republican voted to acquit. The only time that didn't happen was the second impeachment. The second impeachment, because of the January 6th insurrection, a number of Republicans voted to convict, but not the 2/3. I should add, the Republican Party has basically kicked all of them out of the party. All of them. They've all now accepted that January 6th wasn't that big of a deal. That's where we're at now. So, moving on. He stayed in. Grant would be elected in 68. You'll notice I did this because of my honoriness. Blue are Republicans for this. I hate the red state, blue state. Drives me nuts. And this does nothing except just show that I'm not going to follow the red state, blue state. But blue, and you notice there's southern states. Now, the Republican Party is strong in the South. And look at 72. It was the strength of Southern Republicans, and that means freedmen mostly, that got Grant elected. And a lot of white Southerners avoided this election. And when Grant got reelected, there's a lot of these white Southern Democrats who decided, we got to get back into the system. We got to get this back in as Democrats in the South and take back the South. So, really quick, the last few things here. Oh, that's Hiram Reynolds right there. Hiram Reynolds. He took Jefferson Davis's seat. A few of the members of the House got elected for 2 terms. Rebels, 1 term. By the 1880s, they were all out of office. All of them. So, the Republicans, though, they started winning election after election because remember, white Southern Democrats were staying out. And so they started calling themselves the Grand Old Party, or the GOP. And it became so prevalent, I sometimes will call the Republicans the GOP and not even realize I'm doing it. You know, it's just so synonymous in my head. So if I ever say the GOP in class, just know I mean Republicans. Even though the Democratic Party is older, and there's the symbol of the elephant, and at least until 1876, they would be the party of civil rights and education, which is kind of interesting, because 100 years later, they would be the party against this. But that's coming up. We'll get to it with the Civil Rights Act and the Republican Party going against civil rights. We'll get to that in April. Aren't you excited for April? It's amazing how I just know how time kind of goes. And I have been teaching this class for 27 years. Moving on. There's Lincoln. Every time I say that, it gets me kind of old. Yeah. And 2040. So I'll just make up future history. So before the exam, we will go through pretty good detail through 1980. And then small things afterwards that you have to do on your own. Because they always ask a couple questions after 1980, but I know. And then after the exam, I'll finish up any loose ends and do kind of brief 80s, 90s, up to pretty close 2010s. And then that'll be a couple week and a half, and then we'll have our semester final 2 weeks after the AP exam.
Is that going to be?
No, it'll be different. It'll be matching multiple choice and just future ones. It'll be a lot. You guys will work very hard in April. That's my payment back. And then we'll have 3.5 weeks where we're nothing but fitness. Running, trench digging, moat digging. Bring good shoes. Bring gloves. Don't go to 4th period. Huh? Well, moat digging is fun, but then I'll have you fill in the moat and dig it out again. Yeah. Yeah. We'll attack Mr. Mahan's class.
I think we should, everybody does push-ups now, and then just like year see how
How do we get the push-ups?
Because you're talking about fitness.
fitness.
Then go back to your 4th period class.
I remember going to freshmen in my study hall, and I would say things like, I bet you can't do 10 push-ups. And they're like, oh yeah, I'll show you. And I just tricked you to doing 10 push-ups. It makes me laugh so hard. All right, so here, I showed you this picture before. But what Democrats, North and South, would say is that the Republicans are becoming the party up, and they would literally say black supremacy. And the Democrats would call them North and South black Republicans. And here's a cartoon horrifically mocking that elephant. And you can see the horrible face, this horrible caricature of a black man. And it kind of extends with a positive good theory, but coming into this incredibly racist time to divide. And so this would be used by Democrats, North and South, to attack them. See, they don't care about you. They care about, they don't care about you white people, they care about black people. So that's where you get the scalawags, that are the Southern Republicans. And the reason I want to tell you this, I know you knew this, but to show you the cartoons. These are pretty amazing. Here's the first one, trying to show what's happening in the South. They said, this is what they're making us do. This was the Northern plan. Carpetbagger, the carpetbag, forcing a white Southerners now to shine the shoes of a free people. They're promoting black supremacy. Here's from 1876, the 2 platforms. The Democratic platform is for the white man. Look how they show, look at the fade. And then Republican platform is for the Negro and the carpetbagger. And look in the shadows, dark. Look at that horrible caricature. Remember I showed you those pictures when I showed you cognitive dissonance, how they drew the faces. These would be used all the time, and it was quite divisive. It was very effective for Democrats by the middle of the 1870s, North and South. The Klan started, we know about that. There's Nathan Bedford Forrest to keep blacks, Republicans from voting. But once again, the cartoon, this is a really good cartoon showing. These are the kind of things they would make, and they would put on trees in areas where they knew a lot of black men would see. And what is it threatening is going to happen to them? They're going to be lynched. They're going to be put on the horse, and one of the ways to do this, they would string them up, have them ride a horse, they hit the horse rock away, and they would swing and come. Scalawag or a freedman, carpetbagger from Ohio. That's a threat. You want to vote? Sure you want to vote? That's what it's telling. Was this effective? Really effective. Especially once the U.S. Army left. The Army protected, but as soon as the U.S. Army left, you can guess what's going to happen. So the Army protected rights. Not 100%. They weren't everywhere, but so their whole goal was to destabilize the government. Destabilize the government. So then they could say, see, these Reconstruction government, black Reconstruction, doesn't work. Look what happens when they rule. When those people who we said were savages and now they rule. Yeah. Yeah. The word would have been used, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're taking a 20th century word for them. And, oh, one more thing. This is the positive good theory again. See, they can't govern themselves. So, let's get to this. Why did it end? Let's go through this really quick. The big reasons why Reconstruction ended. I can't understate the panic. This horrible depression. Some would argue the panic would last for 17 years, not just 6. You'll say, oh, it ended by 1880. But maybe not. This economic disaster, financial panic, would turn into nationwide upheaval by 1877. So you're going to get a lot of Northerners who are going to say, we have our own problems. Why should we still continue to force Reconstruction on the South? Let them deal with it themselves. Pretty common. People say things like that to this day. Why should we help them when we got problems ourselves? Of course, it doesn't mean they're going to solve the problems in the North. Otherwise, we move on. And next, Grantism. Grant had a problem. There was a lot of corruption, and it discredited Reconstruction. Now, it wasn't that Grant personally was corrupt, but he delegated. And there's going to be a lot of scams. Those are all the many different financial scams on his shoulder, and then these are people attacking him. So it discredited Reconstruction. And there's also, same thing, fighting in the West and the Great Sioux War was happening at the same time. I'll tell you, I'm not going to go through every one of his corruptions, but I will tell you about one on Monday. I think Monday. Next, there was still a lot of racism in the North. And especially when the panic got bad, there'll be a lot of blaming the Civil War, Reconstruction, and freedmen for the economic problems. And they got tired of it. Here are two. Harper's was actually very pro-Reconstruction until about 1873. They totally switched. And here is showing the problems in the country. And what are the problems? Freedmen voting in the South and immigrants in the North. And that's that horrible caricature of an Irishman. That's a similar cartoon too. So taking that same kind of anger, fear, racism, and dividing people. And then the Redeemer governments, they started coming back in. White rule, Bourbon rule. And they said, we're redemption. We're back to the way things used to be. And here's another example of the two platforms. So Clymer's running for governor of Virginia, a Democrat. Geary, his platform. Now Geary was white, but look what they draw, that horrible caricature. Here's the edifice of the state destroyed by black rule, and now the whites have to come in and rebuild the South. And one more thing. What's this outfit? Who wore clothes like this? Prisoners. That's implying they're corrupted prisoners, and that's why they block it. Fit in with that positive good theory. And so the election of 76, you got Hayes, the Republican, who was not necessarily an enemy of Reconstruction, but everybody knew the Republican Party was going away from Reconstruction. Tilden, the governor of New York, and Tilden really could care less about the Reconstruction, but knew if he's against the remnants of Reconstruction, that would get more Southern whites to vote for him. It was a nasty election, waving the bloody shirt, calling each other traitors, racism thrown at the Republican Party. Or they really hit reform from Krampus. That's how the election turned out. The red states are Democrats. And you see the South? 3 states voted for Republicans. The last 3 states had still had military rule. The thing is, Republicans said they won in these states. They sent 19 electors from these states to Washington, D.C. But Democrats said, no, we really really won. Corrupt Reconstruction governments rigged the election. There was all kinds of voter fraud. Gee, I wonder if people say stuff like that today. It's amazing how things just kind of cycle around. Same kind of stuff over and over again. And they sent electors too. So 19 Democratic, 19 Republican electors went to Washington, D.C. They certified them in March. I'm sorry, in January, a little bit later than we do now. The actual electoral vote was 184 for the Democrats. They needed 185 to get 2/3. 166 for the Democrats. I'm sorry, 166 for the Republicans. 184 for the Democrats. And 19 contested. The Republicans have got to get all 19 to get elected. All 19. The Constitution doesn't say what to do. No one knew what to do. What do you do? Well, so we have these the contested ballots. Democrats probably won one of the they probably won one of those states. Probably won South Carolina. So Tilden would have been elected president. Then we got that. Probably. Not guaranteed. I mean, the elections were really weird. I'm not denying that. Stuff went on. But they picked a commission in Congress. 15 members. But since Republicans control Congress, 8 were Republicans and 7 were Democrats. Does anyone guess how the vote went for all 19 of those electors? It just happened to be 8-7. And who got all 19? Hayes. Yep. Democrats went nuts, especially all of these Southerners who are getting back into the race. They went nuts. And they say, we will stop the Senate. Remember that term, the filibuster? We will do everything. We are going to blow everything up. We'll blow it all up. And what do we call the next year where they would make a deal? Do you remember that term? The deal, AKA the Compromise of 1877. The Compromise of 1877. Hayes will be president. So on the semester test, I'm going to ask about Reconstruction. And I'm going to ask about Congressional Reconstruction. For sure, 2 of your choices will be Congressional Reconstruction and the Compromise. Sound good? There'll be 2 of your choices. That's, remember, Congressional Reconstruction, the Military Reconstruction Act. Give an example of what was going on and the effect. They try to bring equal rights, but for one of the, like the Panic of 1873, something, Reconstruction, Redeemer governments took back power, something like that. Sound good for a short ID? Sound fun? I know fun is relative. Short IDs are better than multiple choice. Now that's easy for me to say. I'm not the one who has to write them all. But you get to write what you know. It's not yes or no answer, all or nothing. So, compromise. Hayes is president, and don't worry about the Southern Postmaster. And basically they abandoned Reconstruction. It's going to take 20 years, but military Reconstruction ended. They pulled the troops out. And the Army was already really tiny. A bunch of them would be sent to the West, Montana. This is right after the Battle of Little Bighorn, and the United States was humiliated. They're going to destroy the Lakota Sioux. But don't worry about the postmaster. So with Hayes as president, everything was shifted. This is a big shift in the Republican Party. Big shift. Did I remind you again we have a quiz on Tuesdays? You got that quiz on Tuesday? Everyone got good on that? Okay. So, the Republicans, they had a decision to make. And they decided capital, big business, money, finance, banking, corporations, monopolies. Overnight. It was not overnight. Republicans would still fight for voting rights in the South. Kind of. Because they were Republicans. The Democratic Party would be opposed to equality, but for voting rights. It's very weird for some people. The Democratic Party would become more pro-civil rights by the Progressive era, but still they're always going to have that southern bloc of Democrats all through the 1950s. So that's we get to the New South. And the New South will be created. This is one showing the triumphant of the old rule. Here it's bashing immigrants, the Confederates, and then businessmen to get rich. And that's the New South. Or, anyone watch Gone with the Wind in here? No one did? You did? Oh. But this myth of what the South was like. It is a good movie, but it is 4.5 hours long. I mean, it's a long movie. All right, so the economy of the South. So we got to talk about the economy. And this is right after the Civil War. Remember that whole thing about 40 acres and the mule? General Sherman actually did that. In the Sea Islands, after the March to the Sea, he divvied up plantation land and gave land to the former slaves. By just, General Sherman just made the order. And what did the new President Johnson do to that? Order him to do. Yeah, give it back. So there was an effort to do that. Sherman, once again, Sherman is an interesting man. So there was no compensation ever for what happened to the slaves, except the 14th Amendment. But still, well, I think you know what's going to happen. And so what we have in the South is this. There's really no money. The wealth has been used up, except there's lots of land. And then there are a lot of people, former enslaved people, but also poor whites who have their hands. Now what? I should add, a lot of former slaves, right when they got their freedom, the first thing they did was try to find their family. Remember how slavery, they would sell families and split them apart? The first thing they did, there's stories of men and women wandering, trying to find their family. When the war began, they completely lost touch. And so sometimes they found them, sometimes they didn't. Kind of one of the tragedies of slavery is right after it. And now I can find my family back. I can't even imagine that hell. But the war ended. What do? Well, you got these landlords, the big landholders, the same planter class. They have land, but now technically they don't have slaves. So a system of farming that is as old as there's been any kind of civilization. So we're talking, 4,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of the Tigris and Euphrates River. Tenant farm. Some kind of work contract to pay off a rent. Either you work for your rent or we'll give you a piece of land to farm and you'll work for this rent. Always had tenant farm. And this is always good. Every time this happens, we'll end up the same way. It always ends up the same way. So here we have former enslaved people in Texas. This is Mississippi. They get a little piece of land. And basically they're told, you farm it, the money you make, you can pay your rent. Now, what do they have when they first start farming? What possessions do they have? Nothing. They own nothing. Literally nothing. Not even the basic tools. Remember, the master owned them. So, what do you have to do? They're going to have to go into debt. They're going to have to get the seeds, the equipment, whatever. They're going to have to borrow money and rent, or borrow from the landlords to rent or get seed, and then food. If it's April, your crop hasn't come in. So they all got to go into debt. So the landlords don't have much, but they have more than the tenant farmers. Now this is almost all the freedmen, but it's also a significant number of all of them. So white and black. Tenant farmers. Tenant farmers everywhere. There's still tenant farmers. Then what? What's collateral? Yeah, something of value that if you don't pay it back, they get what's of value. In fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine who very stupidly decided he wanted a new boat. All right, we're a commodore, we need a new boat. And he put his house on his collateral. Oh, I won't lose my job. That's not even the point. But, so the point is, if he can't pay back his debt, they get his house. That's what we call dumb. That's crazy. But what, okay, moving on. Be very wary of debt, even though you're all going to meet a debt very soon. But back to this. So you got to pay it back. But they got nothing. So what's their only collateral? The crop. And when you put something up for collateral, that's called a lien. It's a legal contract. It's a crop lien. So we get your crop, can't pay back your debt. Sound good? Everyone got that? Are they going to make enough money to pay back their debt? Not even close. Farm prices tanked after the war. They didn't make any money. And heck, they're just one bad year. Or locusts come through and wipe out your crop. You're done. So what do? You can't pay back last year's debt. What do you got to do? Borrow more to do it again. And this happens, this goes back throughout history, a cycle of debt. It's really interesting talking about Roman history class, going about Greeks and Romans, and this happening, leading to civil war in the Roman Republic, civil war in Greece, civil war in Samaria, in Egypt. You might have heard of the French Revolution. This happens everywhere and still goes on today. Like in your lifetime, it happened in Tunisia and Syria and triggered what's going on in Syria now. But back to this, cycle of debt. They can't get out. So, last thing for today. So, a new contract we were written. We're not even worry about the debt because you're in it. You'll pay your share of crop. Thus, sharecropping. I am the grandson. And on that happy note, tomorrow we finish this, aka Monday. The quiz will be Tuesday. I'm looking at anywhere from 10 to 1,000 questions. 10 to 12. Sound good? You have the review list. I will narrow it down a little bit on Wednesday, probably Wednesday or Thursday. Sure. Did it film everything? Yes.
I hear that feels like. I hear that.
Harvey Birdman.
Might be a little.
Hey, Marty.
You're so lovely.